So at any rate, thank you all for being here. Again, my name is John Schwartz. I'm the manager of the Winter Recovery Community Center and person in long-term recovery. I also consider myself to be a creative. And, one of the things, the issues that I came up with early on, I started this journey of trying to make this change in my life in the 1980s. And one of the reasons why it didn't stick for me when I came in is the first 12-step sponsor I had told me that I pretty much had to stop doing all of the things that were my identity. So I couldn't play in bands anymore. I couldn't work in kitchens anymore because those were dangerous places where people were, using drugs and drinking all the time, and I couldn't do it. And he pretty much, if any of you have attended Recovery Coach Academy, there's that whole business, who am I exercise where you're taking away parts of people's identity, and that's pretty much how I felt, and I really didn't have the opportunity to explore who I was or what was going to happen with me because of those constraints, and I wound up not sticking around very long because I felt very unfulfilled. Well, you want to put the next slide up? So these are some of the learning objectives for the class. To understand some of the challenges faced by creative people who find it difficult to connect with their creative nature in recovery. Creativity and substance use had once been intertwined. Explore the idea of creativity as a generative activity with tremendous therapeutic and healing potential. To understand and appreciate the value of developing one's authentic voice and to take pride in its expression, and to develop and implement strategies in order to gain free and easy access to one's creativity. Right. So, one of the most common misconceptions about people in recovery who classify themselves as creative or artistic is that they feel they've lost their ability to be creative now that they've removed mind-altering substances from their lives. Some experience acute anxiety over the idea that their substance use was so intertwined with their creative process that they cannot be separated, and thus make the decision to forsake an aspect of their lives which brings them joy and to some extent defines who they are as individuals. Some feel they've lost access to that aspect of themselves and struggle to regain that access. Not having immediate and easy points of access to the creative process prompts people to abandon the endeavor entirely, as their classic standard operating procedure leads them to give up on any undertaking not met with immediate success. Another potential obstruction to being able to channel creativity may be that the recovery process is heavily centered on the subjugation of ego. An individual who has put significant time and effort into keeping their ego in check on the premise that their self-centeredness was the root of their substance use, and that the ego running amok, it's likely to lead to relapse or worse, can find it challenging to muster the confidence necessary to re-enter the creative arena, regardless of how badly they desire to do so. And so like I was talking a little bit about Tom, the guy who was my first 12-step sponsor, and him pretty much telling me that I could not engage in these activities that were important to me. The other thing that I found was that when I tried to re-access some of that creativity, I write music, I play guitar, I play a number of different instruments and stuff, that my inner critic had become so loud now that I wasn't dumbing down my inhibitions with substances, that I found it impossible. I was so busy judging myself that I couldn't enjoy the process at all. And I found it very daunting and sort of difficult to around. Can anybody in the group, think of a time that they had to give up some creative pursuit because they either thought it was or were told that it was recovery threatening? Walter?
Yes, I was trying to think about being a painter, and they told me because of the hours, the objective, what I was painting would not be conducive to my sobriety. So.
And how did you feel about
people, places, and things? People, places, and things.
What do you want to do that? How did you respond to that?
I responded by staying in recovery and building my foundation in recovery, and that's no longer necessary. I do involve myself with people that drink, and it doesn't bother me because I have like over 30 years, but I don't stay in it that long. I'm there for my purpose, and then I get out.
Cool. All right. Stephen.
Yeah, I was told early in recovery, for instance, that I make films and make theater, and that for like the first year, I shouldn't, if that's the culture, that everybody's going to the bar and all of the, discussions and things are happening around these big drinkings, the parties, the premieres, all of that, to really take a break from that. It really did not sit well. I felt like so relating to what you're saying. I felt I felt confused. I felt like the language of the recovery that I was being fed was sort of used to kind of turn against myself. But I was able to find over time that I was able to step away, that I had to build a network of people to check in with. I was able to do it over time in a way that I felt safe. But I don't think it's I kind of was fed that it was an all or nothing thing. And I don't think that wasn't helpful for me. I got very confused about that. But eventually I found a nice, happy medium. I took a little bit of a break, but I didn't really have a guiding principle around that. So this is super helpful for me to have this discussion.
Yeah, I think that there are a lot of misconceptions about, anytime we're put in a position of painting with a broad brush, we wind up doing iatrogenic harm. Like we wind up doing harm from the standpoint of trying to do good. If I've learned nothing about this process, is that it's incredibly individual, and one man's meat is another man's poison, for lack of a better way of expressing it. Manchester, Josh? Or Bill, or whoever it is that want to talk?
Yeah, hi, John. Hi, everybody. Again, I'm Bill. I'm do the vocational stuff now for CCAR on a volunteer basis.
Gonna be dancing in a minute. Should be your creative outlet for the day.
All right, no, you can talk. You're good. Okay, I got just ditch him. I would like to say something like I have almost had the opposite effect of that, because for years now, I've been trying to ditch my IT identity. When I first came in, everyone said, oh, you were in IT. And immediately, you get 20 questions about technology. And it's taken me so long to where now I'm just establishing my identity in recovery as somebody who helps people get jobs and stuff like that. But for the longest time, 20 years, I was tagged as an IT person, and it's really tough to shake an identity. It's really tough. And, like I said, CCAR saved my life when I came here. It was just timing of everything. Just the stars fell in line for me, and I discovered CCAR. And so I guess my creativity, I'm manic, well, I'm bipolar, but my creativity comes to me in the middle of the night. I'm nocturnal. I sleep early evening. And I get my best ideas at like 2 a.m., between 2 and 4 a.m. And anybody who's creative, I think, it runs on that. Oh, something comes into your head and you write it down. It's like that for music, I guess, too, for a lot of people. And, I want to be authentic. And, that's why I come to the center, because, people don't look at you that one way. They don't look at you, as just whatever. They don't tag you or anything like that. And so I'm on this happy quest to get my certification as a career coach. And I think just by word of mouth, you you can shed your identity. People get to know you and what you can do, and they know all of your talents, and they allow that here. And you know, I was just told it was bad to go back into IT again because I couldn't handle the stress. Well, CCAR has taught me that it wasn't my professional life that gave me the most problems. It was my inability to handle my personal life and my relationships. And that's the most growth that I've had in quite some time. I think I was emotionally stunted at like 17 years old, and I didn't grow up until I became into the system, so to speak, the addiction treatment system. So that's just a comment I wanted to make. So thanks.
Thanks, Bill. Thanks, Bill. Glad
Thanks,
you're
Bill.
here. And I feel much the same about you walking into CCAR for the first time. I walked into the center on up in Hartford and met Virginia, and I never felt it changed my whole life. It changed my whole life. I can't go any deeper than that. Is there somebody else in Manchester?
Yeah, hi, I'm Kathy. I'm a woman in recovery.
Hey,
I just wanted to say that, you know, you're talking about that you felt a sense of you're ashamed or told that you shouldn't do things like go work in a restaurant or go to bars or things like that. And for me, it was even if I wasn't at a 12-step meeting, I felt that I wasn't working on my recovery. Like I had a feeling or a sense that the only place I could be working on my recovery and healing was if I was at a 12-step meeting or a 12-step event. So doing things outside of that, you know, made me feel guilty and made me feel bad about that, you know, that I should be doing something else. And it took me a long time to get to a place where I realized the healing and the value, the therapy could be outside of that I could heal by doing things that brought me joy and that, you know, that sparked my creative process. So that's all I wanted to add to the discussion.
and it's very stated, very well stated. I mean, it really wasn't until, I mean, do you think about what Art Woodard said about finding what has heart and meaning and going with that, and that was a huge part of my persona that I felt like I was, you know, cut off from, partially because of outside forces. And then later it was just because I could not, for the life of me, figure out how to access that space in a genuine way. I used to look at my guitar across the room and think that it was mad at me. And it didn't want anything to do with me. Or, you know, it is a very, very odd dynamic. Don?
Hey, yeah. You know, for me, there was a lot of playing in bands and in bars and at parties and partying at practice. And, you know, it was a hard separation. And I tried going back to that stuff my first time through recovery. And I ended up going out again because it just wasn't feasible for me in that way. So I thought that part of my life was really lost. And then later on, you know, I found that through reconnecting with music, some of the best stuff that I've written. Well, first I started building guitars because I figured if I couldn't be around it, I could at least work with something in the musical sphere. And then it got to a place where woodworking and also recording and playing music on my own became just a really zen space. I don't particularly do it for people outside of my realm. It just became something where I felt that freeness and easiness and that zen space. And that's really what creative outlets gives to me, is that serenity. You know, one of the first times I could say like I felt free and serene after getting my life together was playing music again and being able to focus on that stuff. And it was like, wow, there was no chatterbox in my head for a half hour while I was working on this. And it was really, it's such a gift to have creative outlets in recovery because of that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm pretty much the same way. For me, it's all about connection. It's all about connection to original source and tapping into that source of power and freedom that I just absolutely adore. And look, regardless of the fact that I may or may not be in recovery, I'm still an addict. And when I find something that gratifies me in that way, I want more of it. And that's how I wound up at CCAR, because when I walked in there, I wanted more of it. And I was going to do whatever I needed to do in order to make sure that I could be here as much as I could possibly be here. And I came in to volunteer and I never left. Lila, can we go to the next slide? Is that a stale hand in Manchester? Or is there somebody else there who wants to say something? Okay. So Lila, you want to advance the slide? So yeah, we sort of covered this one pretty well, and it's, but the question I have is, does anybody in the group ever have a problem with the whole idea of initially trying to reconnect with their creativity? Like, did it seem odd or contrived or icky in some way? And the other question was if you could think of any other barriers besides the ones that we just talked about that would keep someone from connecting with their creativity. Don?
Yeah, it's funny to me because as I started to get my life back together and started to become an active participant in family and recovery community, and it was a lot easier for me to play music when I was active or have a creative outlet when I was active, because I was avoiding everything else in my life. Now finding a slice of the time to devote to something creative, it takes a lot more active focus on it, because I've gotten a life back, and part of getting a life back is being active in that life, and being engaged with all the different things that come with that.
Yeah, absolutely. Like it's like my other friends in recovery, my friend Steve would say, the benefits of a full life, John, the benefits of a full life, right? and Joseph just dropped the F-bomb, fear, right? I mean, absolutely. Fear ruled my life for decades. And like I said, I didn't realize how strong my inhibitions were because I had spent so long beating them into submission. And then all of a sudden, when I used to think that everything that I came up with came directly from God, all of a sudden I thought it was all terrible. And it turned out that the opposite was true, that I was creating a lot of mediocre drivel when I was high. And once I wasn't, I was able to really think projects through and come up with a really much better quality product than I was producing earlier. Stephen?
Yeah, thanks. I so relate to so much what people are talking about, especially when, I'm sorry I forgot the woman's name, saying that if I'm not doing in a 12-step meeting, that I'm not working enough on my recovery, and then having this totally toggling over to who am I if I'm not completely immersed in my creativity, and that sort of all or nothing thinking. So for me, what's really helped me is just to realize that about balance, that I was so invested in this philosophy that if I just get to make the next piece of film or just get to make the next piece of theater, then I'll be the happiest guy in the world, and then everything's going to I'll reach something. And then I did a lot of those things, and then I had to do something bigger or better, I felt. So for me, having this kind of quantum shift about, yeah, that's a fun thing to do, and that's an integral part of my life, but helping other people and creating a community, I was like I had lone wolf syndrome. So the value of community, not just a temporary one for a specific project, and then everybody goes away, which is what I was experiencing a lot, but a consistent long-term foundation of a community, while I still was able to, and am still able to, connect with making these projects, but not asking so much of those projects to define who I am, that I'm defined more by how I'm helping people, how I'm using my creativity to help people. I haven't figured a lot of this out yet, but I know that's been my guiding star. And it took me a while to shift out of that investment into the creative projects is it's all art all the time, or I'm nothing, or it's all recovery all the time, or I'm not doing enough. So finding balance, I guess.
That whole balance piece is clearly a challenge to all of us in recovery, I would think. I mean, I'm the same way. I had the same feeling. I was constantly involved in doing something that was integral to my recovery 110% of the time, almost to the exclusion of everything else, including family, including, social obligations, including any sort of like hobbies or anything I had. Even my reading was now all geared toward, I had to read everything that Thomas Merton ever wrote, which could take you a very long time. That was something you have to do. I hope you guys are noticing what's in the chat, because Melinda is posting some really terrific stuff. I know she's having issues with the microphone and the camera, but she put one thing in about working in restaurants, which I completely identify with, and how difficult that whole thing is, and the whole financial aspect of creative hobbies. I know that when I finally stopped smoking cigarettes, and all of that money instantly transformed into arcane recording equipment, like instantly. So there's that. Lila, can we go to the next slide? So this is, again, something that a couple of quotes from people who I absolutely adore. Art said this to me when we were sitting in his living room at some point, and he said something about recovery giving us the opportunity to and the clarity to become generative. He talked a lot about the generative part of life, and he talked about it more like as a second half of life thing, but to become generative, whether it's to give back or to pay forward, and so many of us have this desire to do this. And I think each of us has their own way of doing it. And then the other part, the thing from Frank Delaney, who's one of my favorite authors, is that there's so many commonalities in the human experience, and each of us has his or her own unique style of articulating it. And I think it's important for us to recognize that, the human experience may be common, but the way that we experience it as individuals is different. And the way that we articulate it and the sort of epiphanies and revelations that come to us are different. And sometimes the way that we can articulate it will resonate with someone else to the extent that it will help them achieve change in their own lives. And I think that that's really important. And that's why I think that, as someone who considers himself to be creative, my drive to try and explain the human experience in my own voice has been really pivotal to my own recovery and my own growth. And the other thing this occurred to me when I was in this amazing group on Monday. And one of the things that occurred to me is that so much of what we do in our everyday lives and the way that we communicate with each other indicates our desperate need to be heard. When you think about all of the things that we inject into our conversation when we're pausing or whatever, saying some things like, do you know what I'm saying? Do you feel me? You know what I mean? That all these things are a way of saying, please listen to what I'm saying. I'm desperate to be heard, And I think that it's important to consider that on some level, part of the human experience is wanting to connect with other people and wanting to be heard. Developing and speaking in your own genuine voice allows you to understand and process your life better and to communicate some of the revelations and epiphanies we've arrived at using that voice. So I think the whole idea of, coming to find out how best to express the way, you're experiencing life can be really useful, and not just to you, but to other people as well. I find often that once I speak something out loud or once I put it on paper, it becomes much more real to me. I have a bunch of ideas that are bouncing around in my head, and once I can either put them down on paper or put them into lyrics or a piece of music or articulate them in writing, that somehow they become much more real concepts to me. Does anybody have any comments on that particular piece? I'm getting such great stuff from everybody. Does somebody in New Haven have something they want to say?
Hey, John, I don't mean to backtrack. I just wanted to backtrack for half a second. I know that we've heard a lot of shares about, I just want to share my experience. I was lucky
Please.
enough to have a sponsor that, Melinda had put in there something about the haircut. Back in my day, it was, you don't go to the whorehouse to hear the piano player. And I was lucky enough to have a sponsor that said, some people do. Some people do go to hear the music. And so I know there's a lot of people who get kind of conformed in that fear, but the truth is there are a lot of people in long-term recovery that actually know that to kind of try to squash people's souls isn't going to help them stay sober long-term. And my sponsor had encouraged any craft or activity or thing that was going to nurture my spirit, of course, also giving me the knowledge around the disease of addiction and how I needed to be able to stay sober first in order to participate in all these beautiful things. I just wanted to throw it out there because I know that 12 steps isn't a pathway for everyone. In any pathway, there's going to be some people that are going to go to the fear base. But my experience was I had a beautiful sponsor who nurtured the beauty of creativity in recovery and really believed that creativity could exist while we're trying to stay sober. So I just wanted to share that. That's all. Thanks.
Yeah, and thanks so much for sharing that. I mean, I certainly have no intention of turning this whole conversation into a bashing of the 12-step process. It's simply that there are certain activities that we get involved in, especially people who are musicians and the like, we wind up putting ourselves in environments that are, potentially dangerous and that we've been told by other people, stuff like that. But I mean, even taking a look at some places like here in Connecticut, we have like the Windsor Recovery Club where they do musical events on a regular basis. I mean, this is something that they encourage, and there are plenty of people who get together in recovery and do that. For me, the larger question is, if you're someone who's kind of lost their way in terms of being able to access your creativity, what did that feel like? How did you arrive at that point? And what have you done or are you doing to try and regain that? Because for me, like I said, it was a really difficult thing for me. I tried a million different ways to get in, to get access. And it's much more complicated than I expected it to be. And being a hyper critic, of course, I've never been satisfied with anything. So it just led me to greater dissatisfaction, I suppose, on some level, right?
Can I say something?
Stuff?
Yes, can I say something?
Please, Judy.
Okay, so I run the first group of the morning. It's the morning mindfulness meditation group. And first of all, what I've been exposing these girls to is a lot of different, the person that ran it before me, they have a morning, like a reading, and then they write on that and share it. And then I have like a half an hour to do whatever I want to do. And the people before it were just throwing on TED Talks, which we watch TED Talks, I agree, but I'm trying to incorporate some more stuff into it. So I've been showing them like artwork and having them talk about their interpretation of what they think that piece of art means. Also playing songs, interpreting them. But one of the things that I see is a lot of these girls want their hands busy during these meetings. We have a lot of the girls end up crocheting or just doing anything. And, at one point we were like, you can't be working on that while we're in this group. And I totally disagree. I think my mind is so much more open when my hands are busy or I'm being creative. So I'm trying to like really turn it around into a much more creative environment than it used to be. That's it.
Yeah, no, I totally agree and identify with that. And I know enough people who frequent my center who have issues with attention span that they need to be doing something else while they're listening to the meeting, or they really have trouble processing what's being said. And for me, it's like whatever works for you is absolutely fine, as long as you're not like disrupting the meeting or having someone else pulling them off of their attention. So I'm all about that. And I also loved what Liz put in the chat about, some of us not really being able to recognize our own creativity and not knowing where to start. And that's certainly big. And there are all kinds of things that you can do. I fell into this book about 20 years ago called The Artist's Way, which was terrific in terms of like helping me to figure out what I might or may not be interested in, and gave me some very basic things that I could try. Just to sort of gauge my own interest in various and sundry different things. So that's something I did, but there are a number of other things we'll talk about. And also, Judy, I was thinking of you too, as we go into the sort of strategy part, that might give you some more ideas about things that you can do or use in that group in order to help people explore this a little bit further.
That's exactly why when I saw this webinar, I'm like, this is exactly what I need at this moment in time, because I'm looking forward to that.
Excellent. Perfect. Michael.
Hi. Regarding what Judy just said, when I took the recovery coach class, they had they had markers, crayons, they had those felt wire. I don't recall what they called, but they had a bunch of stuff to doodle with on the table to just sit there and, play with your hands while you were learning. I mean, they encouraged it.
Yeah, I miss those toys now that everything has gone into cyberspace. Maybe we should be sending them out to people. But no, absolutely, because not get the creative juices flowing. I mean, and Recovery Coach Academy is such a huge collaborative effort anyway, that like the more that you can get people thinking and being open and sharing, that's what it's all about. Lila, can we go to the next slide? Don, did you want to say something, or is your hand a stale one?
Just a quick anecdote about, having the hands free. I remember being in one of my home groups and reading some literature, and then people sharing, and there was a guy that was there and he was kind of on his phone doing something, and one of the old timers shared, in my day, we came here to look at stuff and see and look at each other and not be on our phones or whatever. And then this guy shared the next thing. He's like, as soon as I heard this reading, I needed to look up the definition of this word, and this person in the history of this program said this about this, and all this stuff is clicking for me, and it's so great. And it kind of put the old timer going, oh, okay, maybe I don't know what that person is doing. And, I don't want to play I don't love people playing Candy Crush in the middle of a meeting. It messes things up. But, we don't know what somebody's going through while they're doing that stuff and looking at different things. So it was another thing of like, I don't judge the people that are around me, and I'm there to rock my own recovery.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that too, because it's, I've learned so much as I've traveled down this road, and I realized that like in the beginning, I was only parroting what I had heard, and that I really didn't have a full understanding, nor was I particularly other-centered at that point in my journey, and as I've grown and I've become more observant of, cognizant of, and supportive of other people's recoveries, I've become much more flexible in terms of what I am willing to tolerate, the great I am. You know what I mean? So like whatever gets you to wherever you want to go, it's not up to me to decide whether it's appropriate or not. As long as you're not negatively impacting someone else's process, it's all fantastic. So this next piece is about the sort of therapeutic value of creativity, right? So creative pursuits are an incredibly powerful tool in processing our experiences. They can act as a form of meditation, contemplation, stress reduction, and can lead to a greater understanding of the world around us and our place in it. Now, I can speak from experience on this in that, my writing and my musical work has really helped me to process a number of things, especially, this has been, I don't know how anybody else responds or reacts to this, but for me, this past few years has been an incredibly stressful period, and between, the political climate and the virus climate and the opioid epidemic, which has taken friends of mine out left and right, I have had difficult moments in processing what my place in all of this was and how it was that I was going to go forward, and I found that through writing and through connecting with, the sort of essential parts of me, and the way I do it is through these creative pursuits, that I'm able to find the strength and the courage and the desire, the passion to go forward. And I found it to be incredibly useful and helping to fill me when I feel like I've been emptied out by events, and so my personal perspective, I can't express my gratitude enough for the fact that part of my personality has been reclaimed, I guess. And the second piece of it is, engaging in creative activities stimulates the parts of the brain which help us to process life's events. Creativity can provide valuable outlets for long-held emotions and opportunities to experience these emotions from a place of connectedness and safety. Everybody in my house knows that, like, when I'm in the zone, I'm in the zone, right? When I'm in that place, I have a different aspect. I have a different facial expression. My body motions are different. I act in a much more natural way. And generally, I'm not going to be disturbed during that period because they know it's therapeutic. And when I emerge from that place of safety, that I'm a much more fun person to be around. But I've also found that, I've just started on a journey of doing EMDR. And a lot of the things that I'm being taught through that process are things that I have also learned to access through my creative nature. Is there any conversation or comments or around this particular piece? Because I feel the therapeutic value in being creative is tremendous, and in a number of cases untapped. Don.
Yeah, I know, to jump in and comment on that, I know that for myself, being a person in recovery and being able to add something to the world or do something, complete a task, work on these things, and actually have something to show for it at the end was really a building block in rebuilding my own, self-worth and self-esteem, like, hey, I'm not just this whirlwind of destruction. I can actually put something back into the world, and it was very therapeutic.
Yeah, that's terrific, and that's sort of how I felt about it too. And it's Stephen.
Yeah, I love that, Don. And I also feel like I love that what you wrote in this, that it becomes kind of a meditation, like anything that requires focus, which was so hard for me when I was active. When a lot of these creative, whether it's writing or music, it requires a lot of focus, and it really helps, for me anyway, to silence the mind. When I'm completely enwrapped, and I don't always get there, but just whether it's trying to solve a creative problem or just getting lost in my creativity, the paralysis comes at different times. So once I sort of break through that, and you mentioned the artist's way, how valuable that structure was, but it really helps calm me down, and it helps silence my mind. If I'm doing it with other people, it helps me really have a sense of community and feel like I'm a part of something rather than just isolated and alone, and feeling like, yeah, it's just kind of a calming down that happens with me when I'm really involved in what I'm doing creatively.
Yeah, I agree 100%. I mean, I think that a lot of what I was looking for in terms of substance use was just to make the world go away for a little while, right? But every time I emerged from that cycle, I was always at a deficit. I was always worse off than I was when I entered that space. And when I use my creativity as a meditative space, not only do I achieve the same effect, in other words, the squirrel cage slows down a little bit, I'm able to look at the world a little bit differently, and all of those things that are like taking up my random access memory are set aside for a minute, the world goes away, and I'm able to recharge. The difference being, when I emerge from that space, I'm no longer operating at a deficit, I'm operating as a surplus. Because not only have I been renewed and refreshed, but I've also sort of come to a couple of revelations, or maybe a little deeper understanding of my place in the world, or like the next best thing to do, or whatever it is. So, it's not as simply shutting off of stuff, but it's a rejuvenation and reexamination of stuff, which I find incredibly helpful and useful in my own process and my own life. Rebecca.
Good morning, everybody.
Hi.
So I love the conversation, and I just wanted to add that for me, I don't consider myself a creative person, although I enjoy the creative process, because like others have shared, it really helps me kind of silence all those thoughts going on all the time. I'm not really good at meditation, although I do practice it, and I do try. But I do find that when I'm down in New Haven and I'm participating in the Zen Tangle, or I'm trying to crochet or do these other activities, I love it. You know, I really enjoy the process. And for me, it really helps in, you know, in my health and wellness. So thank you for this, John. And I love the conversation, and I'm really happy to hear what others are sharing.
Yeah, this is the prototypical Arthur Woodard, we teach what we most need to learn episode right here, because this is like a pivotal, integral part of my life, and I'm hearing amazing stuff. So I'm very grateful for this group too. Super. So any more conversation around this piece? Can we have the next slide then, in that case? So Peter Green. So Peter Green, as you may or may not know, is one of the founders of Fleetwood Mac. And this is just an example of how people who feel like they've lost their ability to be creative and have decided to forsake it forever often find a way back in. And Peter Green was a guy who was incredibly creative. He wrote, as like you said, you could read the slide, you know, you said it yourself. He wrote the tune Black Magic Woman, the one that Santana made famous. He wrote Man of the World. He was one of the founders of one of the most, you know, prolific and creative, you know, groups in like sort of pop culture history at that time. And his use of psychedelics particularly led him into a sort of psychotic and schizophrenic state that landed him in inpatient mental health treatment for a significant period of time. During that period of time, he grew his fingernails until they were about 3 or 4 inches long and decided he was never going to play guitar again because of the way he felt he'd been treated in the industry and because of his own sort of mental health stuff that was a result of all the substance use. He went to live with his brother for a while, and his brother bought an old resonator guitar and just sat it in the corner of his room. And Peter Green kept staring at it and thinking that the guitar was talking to him. And he picked it up and started just feeling the weight of it and fooling around with it. And at some point announced to his brother that he needed to have his nails cut. And he started playing again. He reconnected with his muse. And within a year or two, he had produced this amazing album, a Robert Johnson songbook. I don't know about Robert Johnson, was one of the pioneers of blues guitar. And he wrote this, he created this beautiful record. And what I like to do going forward is, first of all, talk about, do you know of anybody else who wound up in a situation like that where they had been completely cut off from their creative nature and found their way back in? Because I think that a lot of people find that not only do they find their way back in, but when they reconnect, that what they're creating is sort of fuller, richer, more powerful than it was before. And have any of you had that experience, or can any of you think of anybody else who fits that mold, that model? Oh, so the next thing I want to do is Don, go ahead.
Just to jump in one more time. Yeah, there's the lead guitarist for a band called Fish, who I was really into in the 90s. Went through some addiction struggles and was part of this big touring group, and they were making millions of dollars every year, and he just descended into you know, drug addiction and ended up getting pulled over in New York and having to go to drug court, and got himself sober more than a decade ago, and really took a couple years off of playing music with the band to get his recovery underway, and then rediscovered, and the music really changed, rediscovered himself and went back out there and proved that he can be, you know, in recovery and still play this music and, you know, create a safe space for other people in recovery and be a voice for the success of recovery, which was really inspirational to me.
Are you talking about Trey Anastasio? And you know, Trey's foundation, Divided Sky Foundation, has built and opened a substance use treatment center in Ludlow, Vermont.
Yeah, he's doing some good stuff.
Very, very cool. I saw him live not long ago, and he may be clean and sober, but boy, there are a lot of people who weren't at that show. Let me tell you.
Yep.
Spelled a lot like Indonesia in that place. Manchester, Bill?
Yeah, hi, everybody. I'm Bill. Yeah, it's funny that they mentioned psychosis because I had a lot of experience with psychedelic drugs, and now I take psychotropic drugs, and they've quieted my mind down to the point where I got my creativity back again. And that's like striking a balance. I always tell somebody I'm chemically fine-tuned now. And now I create stuff. Technology has actually caught up to my mind because now I'm very visual, and when I create a website, I create a whole concept, from branding something to I'm gifted with being able to create stuff on the computer. And I'm able to go from a marketing concept, the whole thing in business instead of just a screen. Now I can create logos, slogans, content, blogs, anything to be able to reach out. And it's amazing because you put it on the internet and everybody can see your work. That never was that way before the internet. You're a programmer. I had a boss come up to me once and say, "What do you actually do here at the company?" And he was like the CFO. And I said, "I manage your databases so they don't get screwed up." And I had to explain it to him like that because he didn't have a clue who I was or what I did or anything about me. And, now I just find myself so much more creative being in balance. And like I put in the chat box, I knew everything about balance in sports, but nothing about balance in life. And now I have that key that turned my creativity on and made me much more of a human being. So that's all I want to say.
Oh, thanks, Bill. Walter?
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Yeah, since I've become sober and in recovery, my creative process has broadened very, very much so. In high school and in college and junior high school, I sang in bands and in orchestras and choirs. And in high school, I made about 3 albums with Leonard Bernstein and Benjamin Britten. And then my drinking took off because of what I thought was other situations, which was I got cut from the football team. I was let down. And shortly after that, I became I would say a full-blown alcoholic because that's the only thing I knew, and drugs, But since I became sober, I blossomed into such a different person than I thought I was going to be. I started writing. I'm working on a symphony. I'm tonight. In fact, tonight I'm going for an orientation to the Musicians Union. Yesterday, I got a invite from NYU to say that my application for film school is approved. There's so many things that I can do, but I still have to learn. I need to have that balance, that peace. And I find myself at least an hour or 2 hours every day just sitting quietly, and that works for me. Today is not going to be one of those days, but it'll work out itself. I'll know how to treat that this afternoon after I finish my last meeting. About 8 o'clock, I'll just sit down at the keyboard and I'll just sit and play, because that was another one of my dreams, that I wanted to sit and play and be a cafe piano player. I had an opportunity to go up to Harvard to study theology, but I said, I'm not going to go up there to study theology unless I can play piano between the classes. Okay, now I got the piano and I'm waiting for my application to be approved. So there's many things we can do once we find that right balance. But I must always remember, I need to have that quiet time some part of the day in order to get myself together, either the AA meeting or just sitting and meditating by myself.
Awesome. And that sounds fantastic, man. You got a lot of stuff going on. It all sounds absolutely great. Congratulations on that. All right. So Lila, you want to change the slide and cue up that the video? that tune. So what I want to do is I want to play for you. It's a classic Robert Johnson blues song performed by Peter Green called "Love in Vain." It's a great old song. It's about 5 minutes long. It's a little musical interlude before we go into the strategy part of the thing. So you want to just play that for us? Like, do you have this? Do you have this the box checked that you can to share the audio on Zoom?
I thought that I did. Oh, there we go.
I do that all the time. That's the reason I'm mentioning it.
No, thank you. I appreciate it.
Well, I followed her to the station, her suitcase in my hand. Yeah, I followed her to the station, the suitcase in my hand. Well, it's hard to tell, it's hard to tell. To the station, I looked her in the eye. Well, the train rolled up to the station, and I looked her in the eye. Well, I was lonesome, I felt so lonesome, and I could not help but cry. All my love's in vain. Really vain. There was two lights on behind. Now when the train had left the station, there was two lights on behind. Well, the blue light was my blue, and the red light was my mind. All my love's in vain. I will be back to see you some other lonely day. All my love's in vain.
So there's Peter Green
At
from
Groupon,
Johnson's
we want
songbook.
Valentine's Day to be a day to
And again, just an example of somebody who had completely abandoned his creativity and then, you know, came back, reclaimed it, and wound up with that, which is just just an outstanding piece of work. Any questions or any comments on that before we move along? All right.
Yeah, thank you. Walter.
Hey, Walter.
When I started collecting music again, once I got sober, that was his Robert Johnson's complete works is something that I zoomed in on to try to collect. I have it probably spread around the house on my Apple and everything else, but I really have to consolidate it. And I for one, I wanted to get back into music, and that was basically what I used to get my musical teeth, I guess, my set back in my head. And a lot of things started from that basic, you know, I went from him to, you know, other bluesmen, and, you know, there's so many out there. There's so much out there. It's really unbelievable, you know, because basically it's what it started. And today I listened to somebody called Jackie Vernon, and she was taught by a high school friend of mine, Dennis Cesari, when she went to Berkeley. And you know, music is just, and she's a you know, Texas Southern blues guitarist, and you know, you can hear where the roots are coming from with this. Thank you.
Thanks, Walter. All right, I think we better move into the strategies. Lila, you want to move to the next slide, please?
Entering the river.
So we're talking about access here. You know, so in the Hindu tradition, they talk about making connection with original source, or making connection with the universe. They talk about it in terms of river entering, and it is said that it doesn't matter if you travel 1,000 miles to enter the river or you've fallen by accident. It's just as wet. In other, you get just as wet. In other words, it doesn't matter how you find access to where you want to go, as long as you get there, right? And so let's have a look at some of these ideas, some of these strategies that I have researched and found, and other people have recommended to me in terms of trying to reconnect with our creative nature. We have the next one, Lila. Journaling. Journaling is big, and the thing about journaling is, you know, I don't know. I have had different results when it comes to discipline, deadlines, timeline, that kind of a thing. Now, when I was first trying to reconnect with my creativity, I found it really helpful if I set a specific time and day to sit and write, whether I had anything to write or not. It was important just to sit there. Even if I have nothing to write, this is a silly exercise, I don't know why I'm doing this, because I got in the habit of sitting and just emptying my head onto a piece of paper, right? So that was really useful. I've done a couple other things, like I've done the National Novel Writing Month thing. Have you heard of this? So there's a charity called, it's a not-for-profit called the Office of Letters and Light. And every November, for the sake of providing funding for secondary school literary education, they run a contest called the National Novel Writing Month. And the objective is to write a 50,000 word novel in 30 days, like during the month of November. So you've got to have that 1,667 words a day in, or things start to get really, really anxious, right? So I've done it a couple of times, and I found that sometimes it's really helpful because it eliminates the inner editor, right? I don't have time to go back over that last sentence that I just wrote, which may or may not have the wrong adjective in it, because I need to get these 1,700 words in, right? So it turns out that it's very liberating in a way that the inner critic has to take a back seat in order to get the work done, right? So I found that having deadlines can help me in a way, because it helps to shut down that part of that inner censorship part of it, right? So discipline can be important if it works for you. You may find that if you are able to reconnect through discipline, that you may want to stop that. I've gotten in the habit of just carrying a journal around with me everywhere because it happens to me. It's happened to me many, many times over the course of my life that some idea or germ of an idea or line of lyrics or line of a poem or something will just pop into my head and I need to stop and write it down at that moment in time. That's just the way my process works. Michael.
Hi, yeah, you made me think early on in my journey, I was doing some work down in New York in Orangeburg with the Dominican sisters, and it was creativity using my non-dominant hand. So I wonder if you have any wisdom to share on using your non-dominant hand for journaling or in the creative process.
Well, that's one of the things that we talk about, and it's coming up, is the whole idea of just like of shaking parts of your process up, and we'll get to that. We'll get to that in a minute. And whether that means changing the room or changing the color light bulb in the room that you usually work in, or for me, I change either the amps I use or the recording equipment I use for different effects. I move around. So yeah, there's a lot to be said for just approaching stuff from a different way. It's like a new pair of glasses, looking at stuff in a different way, approaching it a slightly different way can give you a different feeling and maybe give you access to something that you hadn't seen before, or maybe make you feel at the part of that activity that was the most important, which is, the fine art quality of using my dominant hand. Maybe that wasn't so important anyway. And the thing that I came up with my other hand was of equal value, but in a different way, right? So absolutely, that's a very interesting point. Can we have the next one? Centering prayer meditation. I also found this to be in my own process very useful. Connectedness and mindfulness can be useful, as access points, but can expand what you're able to draw on in terms of creativity. I mean, think about, what is, think about a painter having a palette of colors, right? If I only have access to a small bit of my total experience, that limits the range of colors, if you will, colors that I can use in my creative project, whether it's a writing project or a musical project or an art project, right? The more access I have to the totality of who I am and my life experience, the more I'm going to have to draw off of when I'm looking for material, right? For creative material. So sometimes getting connected in that meditative, contemplative way can put me in touch with my priorities, so what's really important to me, can ground me, can make me remember that it's not about judging the process, it's about participating in the process. All that stuff can be really valuable in being creative, in terms of being centered and being connected. How about the next one, Lila? This is great. I actually just attended a month and a half ago a group on dream appreciation that was put on by the gentleman who used to be my spiritual director, and he talked about keeping a pad. I used to work for a guy who used to call it a CRS pad, a little memo pad, can't remember stuff, by the side of the bed, so that if you had some kind of a dream that you had impact on, I tend to lose the content of my dreams within about 5 minutes of waking up. So I need to get that stuff down as quickly as possible. I got to a point when I was in this workshop that we met over a period of 4 weeks, of setting an alarm at 3:30 in the morning, because that turned out to be when I was in REM sleep. And every time the alarm went off, something would be going through my mind that I wrote down. And I found it all to be absolutely fascinating. Some people need to do that kind of thing to wake up. Some people naturally wake up from that REM sleep and have that, that memory, dream memory. Some people don't, but the things that are in your dreams, don't forget that, our brains work very, very hard during the night to process the events of our day and the experiences of our life. So sometimes our brain is trying to tell us through dreams, pay attention to this. This is important. So if you come up on that and you can write some of that stuff down, it can be a great sort of seed for a creative project. Any conversation on this? Anybody have any experience with this kind of a thing? All right, let's move to the next one.
Sorry, John.
Michael, you want to add something? You go ahead.
Yeah, I just, I did some dream work early on, and I'm either making this up or it's true, and I wonder if you know the answer. I believe I was told that when you have dreams with multiple people, someone other than yourself, you are that person. You are everyone in the dream. Did you ever hear that?
Yeah, the different characters in the dream, even if they're people that you don't know, can represent different parts of your own personality, right? I don't think there's any hard and fast. And honestly, the course I was taking was much more on dream appreciation than interpretation. So we really weren't trying to pull the stuff apart. We were just simply trying to value different things. And this one, of course, was out of the Judeo-Christian ethics. So a lot of the things we were talking about had to do with that sort of stuff. But yes, absolutely. That I had heard something similar from somebody who was doing a lot of dream work as well.
Okay, thank you.
So brainstorming, do you know other people who are creatives? Do you know other people who are struggling with the same thing? Rebecca mentioned going to that creative group down in New Haven. I know I really missed, we used to do a group on Tuesdays where all the centers would get together and do something. And we always look forward to the one from New Haven because there's always some incredibly inventive thing that was simple enough and beautiful enough for people who are novices at doing that kind of thing to come up with some really, really good stuff. And somehow collaborating with other people, you get that synergistic effect where you may play off of somebody else's ideas, and next thing you know, it turns into something incredible. I mean, think about all of the great sort of like collaborative work that's gone on in the creative world, whether it's Lennon and McCartney or anything else that you can think of in terms of the Rodgers and Hammerstein, these duos of people who work together in order to come up with a great project. So think about the idea of if you're feeling stuck or you're feeling not particularly motivated or you don't feel incredibly, enthusiastic about what you're doing creatively, get together with some other people who might have a creative bent. Join a writing group, join a book group, just something to discuss things with other people to get your ideas flowing. It can be really useful. How about the next one? Yeah, get outside. There it is. This is a big one of mine. I found early on that when I tried to sit still and meditate that I had real trouble with that. And because my brain was always like trying to distract me and things kept floating through my head. And so I took on a practice of walking meditation, which helps me to focus on some other part of my body, whether it's the foot leaving the ground or the foot moving through the air or whatever it is, that helps to keep the chatter at bay so that I'm able to like better process what's going on and leave and sort of clear out all the clutter that's in my head. Nature can be a powerful source of inspiration. I mean, who hasn't looked up at the sky on a clear night and be like, oh my goodness, and found something in them that resonated with that whole scene, or out at the ocean or walking in the woods. The woods is my place. Like the woods is where I go if I'm feeling drained or I'm feeling like I need to be recharged or I need to reconnect with, whatever original source is. So, using all of your senses, to broaden your experience, it can be really important. Remember that you walk in nature, there's all these beautiful sights and sounds and smells. So that's terrific. Any conversation around these bits? All right, and the last one, and this is something we were talking about earlier, about shaking stuff up. Vary your environment. If you're used to sitting in a specific place or being in a certain place or being at a certain time of day or using a certain book or a certain pen or whatever it is, shake it up. It's something as simple as changing the color of the light bulb in your studio can make a huge difference. Like I used to use regular soft white light bulbs and I changed to these clear ones. They're called Clear 40. They're used for artistic projects. And they change the whole look of my room that I work in. And it makes things look very differently. And it really changed my perspective on a lot of things. And the other thing is, as far as shaking stuff up is, give yourself the opportunity to look at things differently. It's very important to figure out what works for you and keep throwing stuff up against the wall. There is an access point. It's all a question of finding out what it is that works for you. Just like there's so many different pathways of recovery, and that I've found that taking bits and pieces from different different traditions and different modalities have been really, really useful in getting me where I wanted to go in my own recovery. The same for creativity. I might need to employ different methods to get to different places at different times, depending on sort of where I am and what my goal is. Walter.
Yes, when you said that very environment and get outside, it really kicked something in. Like I said, in 83, 84, I tried to start a AA meeting at the institution where I worked, but it wasn't until 88 when they walked me off the job that I realized there are flowers, there are trees, the sky is blue, and that aided to me, that aided to me to help get my sobriety and importance and in light where I needed to be. I am the one that needs the importance at that time. I didn't need to have that my brain scattered all over the place, so that at the end of the week, only thing I knew was to satisfy my hunger was to drink and drug, So I still do that today. After practicing, after doing everything I have to do in the house and practicing, and I go outside and I sit at a bus stop and I start to hum and I start to sing, and sometimes it's private and sometimes the people come by that I've seen 2-3 times that week, and we have a conversation, and just that helps me empty that noise in my brain. Thank you.
Thanks.
Can I just say one more thing about nature too?
Because
I live across the street from a state park, and nature was the biggest thing for me in sobriety when I became sober, was my daily hikes. And again, I think part of that too is that when you walk the same trail every day and you see the same trees and the same trail, it's like you see it go through all the seasons. So it's like the analogy of like, no matter what the storm is, that tree is always there. So it's such a grounding technique to be out in nature.
Yeah, absolutely. Like you said, and every day the light is a little bit different, and every day, the season a little bit different, and the flora and fauna is a little bit different. And it's like to be able to see the same sort of like landscape in all of its different aspects is fantastic. I know that during that whole period when COVID was running rampant in early 2021, I guess, those afternoon walks when I was finished with my remote work were so helpful to me in just being able to process my experience and like breathe a little fresh air and come to that understanding again that despite all of this, that all was fundamentally well, and that the things that were in my zone of control was what I needed to focus on and to let the rest of it kind of take care of itself. And that was incredibly helpful to me.
Exactly.
So if nothing else, I think the thing to understand and to respect is that we all find our way into this process in an individual way. Sometimes it's one thing, sometimes it's a combination of things. But again, just like recovery, it's an incredibly individual process, and that there's no right or wrong way to do any of this stuff. It's about, again, paying attention to what has heart and meaning for you, and if it's something that you really want, go after it. Because I have to say that, the first couple of years of my recovery were very sort of sterile in their own way. They weren't incredibly rich or multifaceted. I was very singularly focused pretty much on not dying, and that kept me very, very busy, for probably the first couple of years that I was involved in the process. And so, as I started to branch out further into other parts to gain a little bit more balance in my life, once that creativity part started to become part of that mix, my life became so rich. It was like the part in The Wizard of Oz where it changes from black and white to color. That was sort of the best way I can articulate. Somebody in Wyndham have something to say? Willimantic?
All right. Hey, John, it's Matt here. Good morning.
Hey, Matt.
The importance of the morning walks. I wanted to, that's very important for myself. And also the connection between that and what we talked about the other day, the move a muscle, change a thought. Those are kind of along the same lines for myself, and hopefully that adds something for us. Thank you.
Thank you, Matt. It's good to see you, bro.
All right. Same to you.
Kevin.
Good day. This great discussion here, and it kind of reminds me of there was a violinist with I think it was with the Boston Symphony Orchestra, and like it was their star violinist, and she was bored and she just wanted to quit. And they sent in some people to work with her, and this is a mindfulness person, and they basically said, hold the bow little differently, like just raise your finger and just hold the bow that way with the little finger raised. And she did that, and it was like a whole new experience. Well, the other thing that this reminds me of, and it really sort of wakes something up in me, is this sort of this not just the creativity myself, but waking up that creativity in a recovery, like finding those creative moments and really fanning the flames of those, so that we can start brainstorming and start really thinking outside the box. And I love those generative moments. They feed me. So it's a neat discussion, and just I think about this just not only in regards to myself, but also in regards to my recovery, and just sort of celebrating those creative moments they have.
Absolutely. And when you talk about the process of transformation, like what better supportive tool than creativity to support transformation, because it's all this internal generative process. And I'm trying to generate an entire new life for myself. So what better support than those kind of skills when it comes to that kind of a thing, right? Thank you so much for sharing that. Absolutely. So we're running out of time here. Do we have any sort of questions or comments or discussion around this conversation we've had today? So the access point you discover may be something you've never considered, so keep an open mind. And the other thing I just wanted to point out was that, the things that you discover when you share them with other people may be a pivotal point in their own life and in their own journey. That the things that you discover about yourself may have great value to other people. And I would just ask you to bear that in mind going forward, that your generative capacity may be of an inestimable value to somebody else who you've never met. I used to edit a newsletter for a 12-step fellowship, and I used to encourage people to share that way. If they weren't comfortable speaking at a meeting, they weren't comfortable, doing other kind of work, just to write something to articulate what it means to them, what this whole thing is to them, and it's so therapeutic for everybody involved. It's terrific. Walter, final thoughts?
Yeah, I want to thank you because I live here in Harlem. I'm up in New York City, and the greenery is at a minimum, to say the least. But now that you have broadened my scope of looking at nature a little bit differently and a little bit more, it could become a very good suggestion when I start recovery coaching other people. And I didn't think about that at first, So you helped me a great deal. Thank you.
Great. Well, thank you. I'm glad you got something out of it. I know I got tons out of this. I thought it was terrific. So I just want to leave you with this thought. I did doing my readings this morning. I came across this piece, and it said it was a scientific study, and that what it says is they took in a laboratory cells from the hearts of two individuals, and they put them into a Petri dish. And these cells from the hearts of these two individuals arrived at a common third rhythm that did not belong to either of the individual hearts, but that was just a result of the relationship between those two. The human need for connection is built into our DNA. The fact that those cells can connect with each other and establish an independent rhythm of the separate two parts says to me that our need and our desire for connection with each other is hardwired into us. Use your creativity to make those connections, to make the world a broader and richer experience for everyone. And I'm easy to reach, john@ccar.us. If you have any questions or comments, you want any of this materials, happy to share it. I wish everybody a fantastic day, and take care. We'll see you around campus.
Thank you.